In a quiet little town where everyone knew each other by name, there lived a young woman who was just trying to get through life one day at a time. Her name was Clara, and she wasn't someone you'd notice right away in a crowd. She didn't have fancy clothes or a big house. In fact, most days she was too busy juggling work and taking care of her 6-year-old son Ethan to even think about standing out. Clara worked hard, really hard. During the day, she babysat kids in the neighborhood because she loved being around children and it helped pay the bills. At night, she worked as a bartender at a small pub on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept food on the table and a roof over their heads. People often said that Clara had a heart of gold. If someone needed help moving furniture or watching their kid for an hour while they ran errands, Clara was always the first person they called. She never asked for anything in return, which made her well-liked by almost everyone in town. On this particular crisp autumn afternoon, Clara's day started like any other. After finishing her morning shift babysitting 2 rambunctious toddlers, she picked up Ethan from school. He was all smiles when he saw her waiting outside the gates, his backpack bouncing against his back as he ran toward her. They decided to take the long way home so they could enjoy the fresh air and the colorful leaves falling from the trees. Ethan skipped ahead, pointing out squirrels and birds along the path while Clara walked behind him, smiling softly at his excitement. As they passed near the train station, something unusual caught Clara's attention. A loud scream pierced through the peaceful atmosphere. It was sharp, desperate, and full of panic. Without thinking twice, Clara froze for a split second before instinct kicked in. Grabbing Ethan's hand, she told him firmly to stay put near a park bench. "Don't move until I come back," she instructed, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Then, without another word, she sprinted toward the source of the commotion. When Clara arrived at the scene, her heart sank. A stroller had somehow rolled onto the train tracks, and inside it lay a tiny baby, crying loudly. The sound of the infant's wails mixed with the horrified gasps of bystanders standing frozen nearby. Clara quickly scanned the area and saw the problem. The brakes on the stroller must have failed, causing it to slip down the incline leading to the tracks. But what truly terrified her was the sight of the train barreling down the track in the distance. Its horn blared loudly, warning anyone in its path to clear out. Time seemed to slow as Clara processed the danger. There were only seconds left before disaster struck. She glanced around, hoping someone else would step forward, but no one moved. Some people shouted suggestions, others covered their mouths in horror, but not a single person dared to approach the tracks. For a brief moment, fear gripped Clara. What if she couldn't reach the stroller in time? What if she got hurt or worse? But then she looked again at the helpless baby, still crying and completely unaware of the impending danger. Something inside her clicked. This wasn't the time to hesitate. Pushing aside her doubts, Clara took a deep breath and bolted onto the tracks. Her legs burned as she ran faster than she ever had before. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to stop. Her mind raced with thoughts of Ethan waiting for her back at the park bench. She couldn't leave him motherless. Not today, not ever. But she also couldn't abandon that innocent baby to such a cruel fate. With every ounce of strength she possessed, Clara reached the stroller just as the train loomed closer, its deafening roar filling the air. Grabbing the handle of the stroller with trembling hands, she yanked it backward with all her might. For a terrifying second, it felt like it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through her veins, but she gritted her teeth and pulled harder. Finally, the stroller budged, and she dragged it off the tracks mere moments before the train thundered past. The force of the wind from the speeding train nearly knocked her off her feet, but she held on tightly to the stroller, cradling it protectively against her chest. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, snapping Clara out of her daze. Bystanders rushed to her side, patting her on the back and thanking her profusely. Paramedics soon arrived to check on both Clara and the baby, ensuring neither had been injured during the ordeal. As Clara stood there catching her breath, she finally allowed herself to look down at the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby's cries had softened, replaced by soft sniffles. Clara gently rocked the stroller, whispering soothing words until the child calmed down completely. It was then that a frantic woman pushed through the growing crowd, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around Clara, sobbing uncontrollably. "Thank you," the woman choked out between sobs. "You saved my baby's life." Clara awkwardly patted the woman's back, unsure of what to say. All she could manage was a quiet, "I'm just glad I got here in time." Little did Clara know this encounter was about to change her life forever. After the chaos at the train station settled, Clara couldn't shake off the adrenaline coursing through her body. Her hands were still trembling as she stood there trying to catch her breath. The baby was safe, and the mother, still tearful but visibly relieved, had taken her child back into her arms. Clara felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that everything had turned out okay, disbelief that she'd actually managed to pull it off, and an underlying exhaustion from the intensity of the moment. The crowd around her began to disperse slowly, some people stopping briefly to thank her again before heading on their way. A few even offered hugs or pats on the shoulder, calling her a hero. But Clara didn't feel like a hero. To her, it wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just what anyone would have done if they'd been in her position. She kept telling herself that over and over, hoping it would make the spotlight fade away. Still holding Ethan's hand tightly, she walked back toward the park bench where she'd left him earlier. Her son looked up at her with wide eyes, clearly shaken by what he'd witnessed. "Mommy," he said softly, "were you scared?" Clara knelt down so she could look him straight in the eye. "Yeah, buddy, I was scared," she admitted honestly. "But sometimes we have to do scary things because they're the right thing to do." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, though Clara could tell he didn't fully understand yet. He was only 6, after all. All he really cared about was that his mom was safe. Wrapping her arms around him, Clara gave him a tight squeeze, silently grateful for the fact that they were both okay. They started walking home, leaving behind the commotion of the train station. As they strolled along, Clara tried to push the incident out of her mind, focusing instead on the sound of Ethan chattering excitedly about his day at school. But fate had other plans. Just as they rounded the corner onto their street, Clara noticed a sleek black car parked outside their modest little house. At first, she wondered if it belonged to one of her neighbors, but then she spotted the same woman from the train station standing beside it, talking to a man in a sharp suit. Clara slowed her pace, suddenly feeling uneasy. Why was this woman here? Hadn't she already thanked her enough? As they approached, the woman turned and saw them. Her face lit up with recognition and she hurried over, leaving the suited man standing by the car. "Clara," she called out, her voice warm and genuine. "I'm so glad I found you." Clara forced a polite smile, though inside she was bracing herself for whatever might come next. "Hi," she replied cautiously. "Is everything all right?" The woman introduced herself properly this time, explaining that her name was Victoria and that she was the baby's mother. Clara nodded, remembering how Victoria had hugged her tightly at the station. "I wanted to thank you again," Victoria continued, her tone sincere. "What you did today, it's something I'll never forget. You saved my daughter's life." Clara shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the gratitude. "I'm just glad I was there," she mumbled, unsure of what else to say. Victoria seemed to sense Clara's discomfort and softened her approach. "Listen," she said gently. "I know you probably don't want anything in return, but I feel like I owe you. More than words can express." Clara shook her head quickly. "No, please. You don't owe me anything," she insisted. "Anyone would have done the same thing." But Victoria wasn't convinced. She glanced at Ethan, who was peeking shyly from behind Clara's legs, and then back at Clara. "You're raising your son alone, aren't you?" she asked softly. Clara hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Yeah, it's just me and him," she admitted reluctantly. She didn't like discussing her personal life with strangers, especially someone who seemed so, well, polished. Victoria nodded knowingly, as if she understood exactly what Clara was going through. "I own several businesses and foundations," she explained, gesturing vaguely to the car and the man waiting patiently nearby. "And I'd love to offer you a job managing one of our local community centers. It pays well and it's meaningful work. You'd be helping families like yours every single day." Clara blinked, stunned by the unexpected offer. Was this woman serious? Managing a community center sounded amazing, but it also felt worlds away from her current reality. She worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. How could she possibly fit into a role like that? "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that." Victoria smiled warmly, clearly expecting this response. "Qualifications are important, yes, but so is heart. And you've got plenty of that," she said firmly. "Besides, I'll make sure you have all the training and support you need. This isn't charity. It's an opportunity. For you, and for others who could benefit from your kindness and determination." Clara didn't know what to say. On one hand, the idea of having a stable job with decent pay sounded too good to pass up. On the other hand, accepting help from someone she barely knew felt awkward and overwhelming. She glanced down at Ethan, who was watching the exchange curiously, and felt a pang of guilt. How many times had she wished for a better situation for him? A chance to give him more stability, more opportunities? "I'll think about it," Clara finally said, surprising even herself. Victoria's face broke into a satisfied smile. "That's all I ask," she replied. "Take your time, but please, don't turn this down because you're afraid to. Accept help. Sometimes letting people in is the bravest thing we can do." With that, Victoria handed Clara a business card and climbed back into her car, waving goodbye as the driver pulled away. Clara stared at the card in her hand, its glossy surface reflecting the fading sunlight. She felt a whirlwind of emotions: gratitude, doubt, hope, all swirling together in a confusing jumble. What had just happened? And why did she feel like her life might never be the same again? Ethan tugged at her sleeve, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Who was that lady, Mommy?" he asked innocently. Clara crouched down to his level, brushing a strand of hair out of his eyes. "Someone who wanted to say thank you," she replied simply. Then, wrapping an arm around his shoulders, she led him inside their small house, closing the door behind them. For the rest of the evening, Clara couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's offer. It lingered in the back of her mind as she cooked dinner, helped Ethan with his homework, and tucked him into bed. Could she really step into a role like that? Would it change things for the better, or just add more pressure to her already busy life? As she lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, one thing became clear. No matter what decision she made, her world had shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined just hours earlier. The next morning, Clara woke up with a strange heaviness in her chest. It wasn't the kind of weight that made her feel burdened or sad. It was more like anticipation mixed with uncertainty. Her mind kept circling back to Victoria's offer, replaying their conversation over and over again. She'd tossed and turned all night, unable to shake off the feeling that this decision could change everything for her and Ethan. As she got ready for the day, Clara tried to focus on her usual routine. She packed Ethan's lunchbox, made him breakfast, and reminded him to brush his teeth before they headed out the door. But even as she went through the motions, her thoughts were elsewhere. What would it mean to take on a job like the one Victoria had described? Would it really be as life-changing as it sounded? Or was she setting herself up for disappointment? When she dropped Ethan off at school, she lingered outside the gates longer than usual, watching him run off to join his friends. He seemed so carefree, laughing and chasing after a soccer ball with his classmates. Clara wished she could bottle that sense of freedom and simplicity, if only for a little while. Instead, she sighed deeply, knowing she had decisions to make. Decisions that might shape their future in ways she couldn't yet predict. Her first stop after leaving the school was the local park. She often came here when she needed space to think. There was something calming about the rustling leaves and the distant chatter of children playing that helped clear her mind. Sitting on a weathered bench under a big oak tree, Clara pulled out the business card Victoria had given her. The sleek design felt foreign in her hands. a stark contrast to the worn-out notebook she usually carried around to jot down babysitting schedules and grocery lists. She stared at the card, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. It wasn't just an offer. It was an invitation into a world she didn't fully understand. Clara had spent most of her life working hard to survive, never daring to dream too big because reality always had a way of pulling her back down. And now, someone like Victoria, a woman who clearly lived in a completely different orbit, was offering her a chance to step into something bigger. But was she ready for it? Clara leaned back against the bench, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. She thought about the community center Victoria had mentioned. Growing up, Clara hadn't had access to places like that. Her own childhood had been filled with struggles, moving from one relative's house to another, never quite feeling like she belonged anywhere. If there had been a safe space where kids like her could go, maybe things would have been different. Maybe she wouldn't have felt so lost for so long. That thought stayed with her as she walked home later that afternoon. By the time she reached her front door, she'd made up her mind, at least partially. She decided she'd call Victoria and ask more questions. Not because she was committing to anything, but because she owed it to herself, and to Ethan, to explore the possibility. After all, what harm could come from learning more? The call was scheduled for the following evening, and Clara spent the entire day leading up to it rehearsing what she wanted to say. She didn't want to sound ungrateful or overly eager, but she also didn't want to waste Victoria's time. When the phone finally rang, her heart raced as she picked it up. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steadier than she expected. "Hi, Clara?" Victoria said warmly, sounding exactly as she had the day before. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Clara replied honestly. "Still processing everything, I guess." Victoria chuckled softly. "I can imagine. Listen, I know this is a lot to take in. I don't want you to feel pressured. This isn't about me doing you a favor. It's about finding someone who truly cares about making a difference. Someone like you." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to being spoken about in such glowing terms. Most people saw her as just another hard-working single mom trying to get by. Hearing Victoria describe her as someone capable of leading a team and helping others felt surreal. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to make sure I'm the right person for this." "You are," Victoria assured her confidently. "But let's talk details. Tell me what's worrying." "You." So Clara did. She poured out her concerns, the fear of not being qualified enough, the worry about balancing work with raising Ethan, the anxiety of stepping into unfamiliar territory. To her surprise, Victoria listened patiently, addressing each point with thoughtful responses. She explained that Clara wouldn't be thrown into the deep end. There would be training sessions, mentors, and ongoing support. She emphasized that Clara's experience as a mother and caregiver already gave her skills that no degree could teach. By the end of the call, Clara felt lighter, as if some of the weight she'd been carrying had lifted. Victoria hadn't pressured her into saying yes, but she'd painted a picture of a future that felt within reach. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to wake up every day knowing her work mattered. Not just to pay the bills, but to actually improve lives. Over the next few days, Clara found herself researching the organization Victoria had mentioned. She visited their website, read testimonials from families who had benefited from their programs, and even reached out to a couple of employees listed online. Everyone she spoke to raved about the company's mission and culture. One woman, in particular, shared how the organization had helped her turn her life around after struggling to find stable employment. Hearing stories like that made Clara's decision feel less daunting and more hopeful. Finally, after much deliberation, Clara called Victoria back. "I've thought about it," she began nervously, "and I'd like to accept your offer." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a delighted laugh. "Clara, that's wonderful!" Victoria exclaimed. "You won't regret this, I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Clara believed her. With her decision made, Clara threw herself into preparing for her new role. Victoria arranged for her to visit the community center the following week, giving her a tour and introducing her to the staff. From the moment Clara stepped inside, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. The walls were covered in colorful murals painted by local artists, and the rooms buzzed with activity, children reading books, parents attending workshops, volunteers organizing supplies. It was alive with purpose, and Clara knew instantly that she'd made the right choice. Her first few weeks were a whirlwind of learning curves and adjustments. She attended training sessions, shadowed senior staff members, and slowly began taking on responsibilities. At times, she doubted whether she was cut out for the job, especially when faced with challenges she'd never encountered before. But every time she felt overwhelmed, she remembered why she was there: to create a better future for kids like Ethan and families like hers. Ethan noticed the change in his mom almost immediately. She seemed happier, more energized, and less stressed about money. He loved hearing her talk about the projects she was working on and the people she was meeting. One evening, as they sat together on the couch flipping through a photo album, Ethan looked up at her and said, "Mommy, you're like a superhero now." Clara laughed, hugging him close. "No, buddy," she replied. "I'm just doing my best, same as always." But deep down, she knew he was right. In saving that baby on the train tracks, she hadn't just changed one life. She'd opened a door to a whole new chapter. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Clara was ready to embrace whatever came next. As the weeks turned into months, Clara settled into her new role at the community center. At first, it felt like stepping onto a stage she wasn't sure she belonged on. The polished floors, the organized offices, and the constant hum of activity were so different from anything she'd ever experienced before. But as time went on, she began to feel more comfortable, not just with the work itself, but with the people around her. The staff quickly warmed up to Clara. They admired her no-nonsense attitude and her ability to connect with everyone who walked through the doors. Whether it was a struggling single parent looking for resources or a teenager seeking advice about college applications, Clara had a way of making people feel seen and heard. She didn't have all the answers, but she listened, really listened, and that made all the difference. One of the things Clara loved most about her job was seeing how small actions could lead to big changes. For example, there was a young boy named Liam who came to the center every afternoon after school. His mom worked long hours, and he often spent his evenings alone at home. When Clara noticed him sitting quietly in a corner one day, sketching pictures in a notebook, she struck up a conversation. It turned out he loved drawing but didn't think anyone would care about his art. Clara encouraged him to join the centers, weekly creative workshops where kids could explore their talents under the guidance of local artists. At first, Liam was hesitant. He didn't believe he was good enough to participate. But Clara kept gently nudging him, reminding him that trying something new didn't mean he had to be perfect, it just meant he was willing to grow. Slowly but surely, Liam started attending the workshops. Over time, his confidence grew, and his artwork began to shine. By the end of the year, he even entered a piece in a local art competition, and won second place. When Clara saw the pride in his eyes as he held up his ribbon, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was why she did what she did, to help people see their own potential. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were days when Clara felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of need in the community. No matter how hard she and her team worked, it sometimes felt like they were barely scratching the surface. Budget constraints, limited resources, and endless waiting lists weighed heavily on her mind. On those tough days, she would call Victoria, who always seemed to know exactly what to say to lift her spirits. Victoria became more than just Clara's boss. She became a friend and mentor. Their relationship evolved naturally over time, built on mutual respect and shared values. Clara admired Victoria's dedication to giving back to the community, while Victoria appreciated Clara's authenticity and tireless work ethic. They often met for coffee or lunch, discussing everything from fundraising strategies to personal challenges. During one of these meetings, Clara opened up about her fears. Sometimes I worry I'm not doing enough, she admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. There are so many families out there who need help, and I feel like we're letting them down. Victoria leaned forward, her expression serious yet kind. Clara, you can't save everyone, she said gently. But you're making a difference for the people you can reach. That matters. Don't underestimate the ripple effect of your work. Every family you support, every child you inspire, they take that positivity back into their lives and share it with others. You're planting seeds, even if you don't always get to see them grow. Clara nodded slowly, letting Victoria's words sink in. She realized that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. All she had to do was focus on doing her best each day, trusting that her efforts would create lasting impact, even if she couldn't measure it right away. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to thrive in his own little world. With Clara's schedule becoming more stable, she was able to spend more quality time with him. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, baking cookies together, and reading bedtime stories. Ethan adored hearing about the projects Clara was working on, especially the ones involving kids his age. He even started volunteering at the center during school breaks, helping set up tables for events or handing out flyers. Watching him interact with the other children brought tears to Clara's eyes. He was growing into such a kind-hearted, empathetic young boy, and she knew part of that was because he was surrounded by positive role models, including herself. Clara also found joy in organizing programs that directly addressed the needs of single parents like her. She remembered how isolating it had felt raising Ethan alone, without much of a support system. So she launched a monthly support group where moms and dads could come together to share their experiences, swap tips, and simply vent about the challenges of parenting solo. The group quickly became one of the center's most popular initiatives, with members forming tight-knit friendships that extended beyond the meetings. One evening, after wrapping up a particularly successful session, Clara stayed behind to tidy up the room. As she stacked chairs and wiped down tables, she reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful day at the train station. Back then, she'd been just another face in the crowd, struggling to keep her head above water. Now, she was leading a team, running programs, and making a real difference in people's lives. But what surprised her most was how much she had changed in the process. She used to doubt herself constantly, questioning whether she was smart enough, strong enough, or capable enough to achieve anything meaningful. Now she stood tall, knowing that her worth wasn't defined by her past struggles, but by the love and effort she poured into her present. As she locked up the center and headed home, Clara couldn't help but smile. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, sleepless nights, and moments of self-doubt. But it was better. Not just for her, but for Ethan too. And as she walked under the starlit sky, she allowed herself to dream a little bigger. Maybe someday she'd open her own community center, or maybe she'd write a book sharing her journey to inspire others. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain. Clara was ready to face it head-on, armed with courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the power of kindness. When she arrived home, Ethan was already asleep, curled up in bed with his favorite stuffed animal tucked under his arm. Clara kissed his forehead softly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, buddy." Then she turned off the light and sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. For the first time in a long time, she felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she finally believed she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the months rolled by, Clara's confidence in her new role grew stronger with each passing day. She no longer second-guessed herself when making decisions or leading meetings. The community center had become more than just a workplace. It was a second home to her. Every morning as she unlocked the doors and flipped on the lights, she felt a sense of purpose that she'd never experienced before. It wasn't just about helping people. It was about creating something lasting, something that could outlive her own efforts and continue to touch lives for years to come. One evening, after a long but fulfilling day at the center, Clara received an invitation from Victoria to attend a charity gala hosted at a luxurious hotel downtown. At first, Clara hesitated. These kinds of events weren't really her scene. Fancy dresses, glittering chandeliers, and conversations filled with words like philanthropy and endowment didn't exactly scream comfort zone. But Victoria insisted, saying it would be a great opportunity for Clara to network and share her story with influential people who could help expand the center's reach. Reluctantly, Clara agreed, though she made sure to borrow a simple black dress from a co-worker instead of splurging on something expensive. The night of the gala arrived, and Clara found herself standing outside the grand ballroom, clutching her purse tightly as she took in the opulence around her. Women in elegant gowns and men in sharp tuxedos mingled under sparkling lights, their laughter echoing softly through the room. Clara felt completely out of place, like a fish tossed into unfamiliar waters. Still, she reminded herself why she was there, to represent the center and the families it served. That thought gave her enough courage to step inside. Victoria greeted her warmly, immediately introducing her to several guests. Each introduction came with glowing praise. "This is Clara, the heart and soul of our community center." Or, "Clara saved a baby's life. You won't believe how brave she is." Clara blushed every time, brushing off the compliments with modesty. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but she couldn't deny the warmth she felt from the genuine admiration in people's eyes. Midway through the evening, Victoria took the stage to give a speech. Clara watched nervously from the sidelines, wondering what her mentor might say. As Victoria began speaking, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. She talked about the importance of giving back to the community, emphasizing that true wealth wasn't measured by money but by the positive impact one could have on others' lives. Then, without warning, she turned the spotlight directly onto Clara. "Tonight, I want to honor someone very special," Victoria said, her voice steady and sincere. "Her name is Clara, and though she may not realize it, she's changed countless lives, including mine." Gasps rippled through the audience as Victoria shared Clara's story, recounting the harrowing train station rescue and how it had led to Clara joining the organization. By the time Victoria announced the establishment of a new scholarship fund, named after Clara, the Courage Award, the entire room erupted into applause. Clara stood frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't expected this. All she'd done was follow her instincts, yet here she was, being celebrated as if she were some kind of hero. When Victoria beckoned her to join her on stage, Clara hesitated, feeling every set of eyes in the room trained on her. But then she thought of Ethan, of Liam, of all the families who relied on the center. Taking a deep breath, she walked up to the podium, her legs trembling slightly beneath her. I don't know what to say," Clara began, her voice quivering. "I've always believed that doing the right thing shouldn't be extraordinary. It should be normal. We're all capable of kindness, of stepping up when someone needs us. So tonight I want to thank each of you, not for honoring me, but for supporting the work we do at the center. Because none of this would be possible without people willing to care about others." Her words earned another round of applause, louder this time. As she stepped off the stage, Victoria enveloped her in a tight hug. "You deserve this, Clara," she whispered. "Never forget how much you inspire others." After the event, Clara returned home exhausted but exhilarated. Ethan was already asleep, so she tiptoed into his room, watching him breathe peacefully for a few moments. She thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day at the train station, the twists and turns that had brought her here. Life had thrown her curveballs, but somehow she'd managed to catch them and turn them into opportunities. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of what she'd accomplished, but of who she'd become. Later, that week, Victoria invited Clara over for coffee at her sprawling estate. It was the first time Clara had seen where Victoria lived, and she couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the place. The house was surrounded by lush gardens, and sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting golden hues across the marble floors. Despite its grandeur, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, thanks largely to Victoria's down-to-earth personality. As they sat together in the cozy living room, sipping freshly brewed coffee, Victoria opened up about her own struggles. You probably think my life has been perfect, she said with a wry smile. But trust me, it hasn't. Being successful doesn't mean you don't face challenges. In fact, sometimes it makes things harder. Clara listened intently as Victoria explained how her demanding career had often left her feeling disconnected from her family. I spent years chasing achievements, thinking that would make me happy, Victoria admitted. But seeing you that day at the train station reminded me of what really matters, being present for the people you love. Clara nodded, understanding. Completely. I used to feel guilty for not having more to give Ethan, she confessed, like I wasn't doing enough as a mom. But now I see that showing up, even when it's hard, is what counts. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on topics ranging from motherhood to personal growth. Clara realized that despite their vastly different backgrounds, she and Victoria shared a common thread. Both had learned the value of resilience and compassion through their experiences. They laughed, cried, and bonded in ways that transcended social status or material wealth. Before leaving, Victoria handed Clara a small box wrapped in delicate paper. "Open it later," she instructed with a knowing smile. Curious but obedient, Clara tucked the gift into her bag and headed home. That night, as Ethan slept soundly in his bed, Clara finally unwrapped the box. Inside was a handwritten note from Victoria, along with a silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Courage changes lives." Tears pricked her eyes as she read the note. "Dear Clara, thank you for reminding me, and everyone around you, what true strength looks like. You've inspired me to be better, to do better. Wear this as a reminder of your incredible journey and the countless lives you'll continue to touch. With love and gratitude, Victoria." Clara clasped the bracelet around her wrist, feeling a surge of emotion wash over her. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of everything she'd overcome and everything she still hoped to achieve. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she dreamed of possibilities. Maybe someday she'd open her own center. Maybe she'd write a book. Or maybe she'd simply keep doing what she was doing, one act of kindness at a time. Whatever the future held, Clara knew one thing for certain: she was ready. Months turned into years, and Clara's life continued to transform in ways she never could have imagined. The community center had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood, a place where families gathered not just for resources, but for connection and hope. Under Clara's leadership, the center flourished. Programs expanded, volunteers poured in, and local businesses began partnering to offer workshops and sponsorships. It wasn't always easy. There were still hurdles to overcome. But Clara faced each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through her toughest days. One of the most rewarding aspects of her work was seeing how it impacted people on a personal level. There was Maria, a single mother of 3 who came to the center looking for help finding a job. With Clara's guidance, she enrolled in free training courses and eventually landed a stable position at a nearby office. Then there was Jake, a teenager struggling in school, who discovered his passion for photography during one of the center's creative sessions. He went on to win a scholarship to study visual arts at college. Stories like these filled Clara's heart with pride. She knew she hadn't done it alone. It took a team of dedicated staff and volunteers, but she also knew none of it would have been possible without her unwavering commitment. Ethan, too, grew up surrounded by positivity and purpose. Watching his mom lead with compassion inspired him to be kinder, more empathetic, and more confident. By the time he reached middle school, he was volunteering regularly at the center, helping younger kids with their homework or organizing games during family events. One day, while they were cleaning up after an afternoon program, Ethan looked at Clara and said, "Mom, you're my hero." Clara laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "You don't need heroes," she told him. "Just people who care enough to try." But even as Clara thrived in her role, she never forgot where she came from. Her roots kept her grounded, reminding her that success wasn't about titles or money. It was about making a difference. That belief stayed with her when Victoria approached her with a new opportunity: funding to start her own community center in a neighboring town that desperately needed support. At first, Clara hesitated. Could she handle the responsibility of running 2 centers? What if she failed? Victoria saw the doubt flickering in her eyes and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Clara, you've already proven you can do this, she said firmly. Trust yourself and remember, I'll always be here to support you. Those words gave Clara the push she needed. With Victoria's backing and her own relentless drive, she dove headfirst into the project. Opening. The second center was no small feat. It required countless hours of planning, fundraising, and outreach. But Clara tackled every task with enthusiasm, fueled by the knowledge that she was building something meaningful. When the doors finally opened, the response was overwhelming. Families streamed in, eager to take advantage of the programs and services offered. Seeing the smiles on their faces made all the hard work worth it. As the years passed, Clara's reputation spread beyond the local community. News outlets began featuring stories about her journey, from the train station rescue to her rise as a leader in grassroots activism. People marveled at how someone who had once struggled to make ends meet had managed to build such a lasting legacy. Clara didn't seek the attention, but she appreciated the platform it gave her to advocate for others. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and even collaborated with national organizations to promote initiatives supporting single parents and underprivileged children. Through it all, her friendship with Victoria remained strong. They continued to meet regularly, sharing updates on their lives and discussing ideas for future projects. Their bond transcended mentorship. It was built on mutual respect and admiration. Victoria often joked that Clara had taught her as much as she had taught Clara. "You reminded me what truly matters," Victoria would say, "and for that, I'll forever be grateful." Clara's relationship with Ethan deepened as well. As he entered his teenage years, they navigated the ups and downs of adolescence together. There were moments of tension, of course, as any parent knows, but their foundation of trust and love kept them close. Ethan often told his friends about his mom's work, bragging about how she'd saved a baby's life and helped hundreds of families. To him, she wasn't just his mom, she was a role model, someone who showed him the power of courage and kindness. Looking back on her journey, Clara realized how interconnected everything had been. Saving that baby on the train tracks hadn't just changed the child's life. It had set her own life on a completely different path. If she hadn't acted that day, she might never have met Victoria, taken the job at the community center, or discovered her ability to lead and inspire others. Every decision, every twist of fate had led her here, to a place where she felt fulfilled, valued, and loved. On a quiet evening, years after that fateful day at the train station, Clara found herself sitting on the porch of her modest home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Ethan was inside finishing his homework, and the world seemed peaceful. She thought about how far she'd come, not just geographically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had started out as a woman simply trying to survive, and now she was thriving, creating ripples of change that extended far beyond her wildest dreams. Clara smiled to herself, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been beautiful. She had learned that even the smallest acts of bravery could spark monumental transformations, not just in others' lives, but in her own. And though she didn't consider herself extraordinary, she knew one thing for certain: she had made a difference. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, Clara whispered a silent thank you to the universe, to Victoria, to Ethan, and to the little baby whose cries had called her onto those tracks so many years ago. Without realizing it, that moment had planted a seed of courage within her, a seed that had grown into something remarkable. And as she sat there, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Clara understood that her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone whose life she had touched along the way.